New Accra glowed like a reef at low tide, lights shimmering along the curve of the bay. Stalls crowded the waterfront promenade, every table and counter steaming, sizzling, or smoking with food. Red lanterns swung in the ocean breeze, their shadows sliding over queues of hungry people. The annual Heatwave festival had started at 6 p.m., as it always did. The tradition had begun as a celebration of the harvest of local peppers. Now it was an excuse for anyone with functioning taste buds to test their limits. The bravest clustered around the central plaza, where a long table waited for the midnight challenge. Bowls of stew so hot the air above them already shimmered, even though the burners were off. Near the edge of the plaza, a group of teenagers argued about which stall had the most lethal sauce. Mothers bargained with spice vendors, haggling over bags of dried chilies. A grandfather sat beside a cart piled high with grilled skewers, telling a child how he had once won the challenge, eating with one hand while fanning his eyes with the other. Above all of it, in orbit high enough that the party was only a smear of light, Orbital Fortress Steadfast tracked a different kind of fire. Object clusters at vectors 2.9 and 8.3, Lieutenant Pavel Vlecek reported, eyes flicking between holographic projections. Tiny streaks of red marked the incoming meteoroids, if they were meteoroids at all. Initial mass readings, micro to submicro range, some larger fragments. Admiral Harada watched the sphere of Earth rotate slowly in the main display. The night side sparkled. Somewhere under one of those clusters of light, he knew, his son was probably in a crowded festival very much like the one in the feed from New Accra. Kenji's hand curled once, briefly, then relaxed behind his back. Trajectory? He asked. Pavel swallowed. Passes through upper atmosphere in approximately 19 minutes, sir. Too steep to be natural, but there is scatter. They may burn up on entry. They may not, Kenji said. Steadfast's defense grid hummed into higher power. Automated interceptors spun up. Along the equator, ground-based lasers pivoted, spooling energy, their output invisible to the humans who walked and talked and laughed under the bright lanterns. To most of those humans, the sky looked beautiful. The networks were full of snapshots of the unexpected meteor shower, tags and short clips from every major city. In New Accra, as the first burning streaks scratched across the darkness, people stepped out from under awnings, phones raised. In the crowd, a teenage boy in a faded festival shirt pointed up. "Make a wish," he said, grinning. His sister sniffed the bowl of pepper stew in front of her, sneezed, and retorted, "I wish you'll stop daring me to eat this murder soup." Around them, the air was thick with the smell of chili, grilled meat, and fermented sauces. Somewhere, a brass band launched into a song that had become an unofficial anthem of the Heatwave festival. The notes carried on the wind, strangely cheerful against the quiet roar that no one on the ground could hear, the upper atmosphere heating as something unnatural rubbed against it. On Steadfast, initial interceptors fired. Beams of coherent light lanced into the flock of objects. The largest of them flared, shattered, became smaller streaks. Others winked out as they disintegrated. Impact probability? Kenji asked. Minimal for macroscopic bodies, Pavel answered. But there is, sir. There is particulate scattering, dust size and smaller. Some of it will stay aloft. Some will descend. Kenji's gut tightened. He had seen that kind of dispersion pattern a long time ago, in a file marked classified, shown to him by a Calarian observer with tremors in their frilled tendrils. "I want full atmospheric sampling," he said. "Helix mantle goes to heightened alert. All biosurveillance nodes online. If this is what I think it is, we are already behind." He did not say the name that had haunted the darker edge of interstellar diplomacy for years. Redhowl. That word belonged in reports and nightmares, not in the open air of his command deck. On the planet below, the first tiny particles of alien design drifted down through the night and vanished into lungs that were laughing, singing, arguing over who could handle more heat. The boy in the festival shirt felt a cold tickle when a particle brushed the lining of his throat. By the time it found his pain receptors, the chili in his stew was already there. Molecules humming with bonded carbon and hydrogen, ready to meet a visitor it had never evolved to see. The universe took a breath. By 8 p.m., emergency rooms in 3 new Accra districts were filling with people complaining of sudden fevers and a strange burning under their skin. By 9 p.m., similar reports began to spike in 6 other cities on different continents. By 10 p.m., the Helix Mantle's automated pattern recognition flagged an anomaly and pinged every major health authority in the Solaris Combine. Dr. Amaka Nwosu was reading an overdue journal submission when her slate flashed crimson with the mantle's priority color. She pushed her chair back from the lab bench, muttered something under her breath, and tapped the alert. The Helix Mantle's avatar did not appear. This was not the time for niceties. Instead, a flood of data streamed across her retinal display. Vital signs, symptom descriptions, timestamps, location clusters forming a global map. Everywhere at once, she murmured. Too broad for a natural pathogen, too targeted for an accident. Behind her, banks of equipment hummed quietly. Cultures slept, sequencers idled. The lab was an odd pocket of calm in the storm building outside. The second alert, arriving less than a minute later, carried biomaterial. Samples incoming from New Accra General, Helix 9. Announced through the lab speakers. The AI's voice was carefully neutral, its tone flattened by design to avoid influencing human mood. Priority 2 emergent agent suspected. Routing to Containment Bay 3. Spare the preamble, Amaka said, already moving. Get the containment systems hot. I want negative pressure and triple scrub. Footsteps echoed in the corridor as her team, pinged by the same urgent cascade of alerts, converged toward the core of the research center. Yi Sunhee was the first to join her, hands already stripping on a sterile layer of smart fabric over her clothes. How bad? Yi asked. We do not know enough yet to define bad, Helix 9 said. We know only that it is not good. If an AI could wring its hands, Yi muttered, pulling the hood over her head, you would be doing it right now. That would not be hygienic, Helix 9 replied. Within 5 minutes, Amaka stood on one side of a transparent barrier, looking at a sealed canister of blood and mucus, illuminated by ultraviolet light. The material looked ordinary. It was not. Get me everything, she said. Full genomic scan, proteomics, behavior and lymph analog, and match symptoms. I want to see what it is matching in the neurons. Helix 9 complied. Data unfolded, tiny sequences of foreign nucleotides, wrapping and coiling with an artistry that might have been beautiful if not for its purpose. Proteins budding like hooks, receptors seeking familiar shapes. It is targeting TRPV1 and related pain receptors, Helix 9 said. It binds to the same channels that respond to heat and to capsaicin. Once attached, it injects gene segments that appear designed to... Appear designed to what? Amaka asked. To use the existing neuron as a relay, then rewrite host cellular behavior over time. Multiple targets. Muscular. Reproductive. Neurochemical. It is comprehensive. Yi swore softly. Someone decided to weaponize agony. Helix 9 continued. Faster now. Voice clipped. If allowed to progress, these pathways converge toward a stable state in which the host expresses markers similar to known Krethis organofabrication matrices. The host tissue would become compatible with Krethis construction bioforms. Amaka felt cold despite the warmth of the lab. It turns people into factories, she said. Not just corpses. Infrastructure. That is a reasonable characterization. Amaka stared at the canister. The agent inside did not care what she thought of it. Its purpose was simple. Its confidence in that purpose was written into every folded sequence. She had seen simulations of Redhowl attacks on lesser worlds. She had never expected to see the real thing in her own lab. Helix 9, she said quietly. Send this data to Steadfast Command, the Solaris Combine Leadership, and the Calarian Confluence Delegation. Full priority. Tag. Redhowl suspected. And open a secure channel to Orbital Fortress Steadfast. Admiral Harada will want to know exactly what we are looking at. Yes, Doctor, Helix 9 said. On Steadfast, an alarm changed tone. Pavel glanced at the status panel, then up at Admiral Harada. Kenji read the label that had just appeared in the corner of his field of view. He did not let himself exhale too fast. "Get me Dr. Nwosu," he said, "and open a line to the Calarian envoy. If this is confirmed, we will need more than guns." At a relay node deep in space, filaments of the Aureliad loom stirred, sensing priority data flowing through encoded channels. The loom tasted a familiar arrangement of nucleotides and shuddered through a network spanning light days. Several thousand Aureliad minds paused what they had been considering and turned their collective attention toward a small blue planet whose inhabitants had a reputation for being noisy, inventive, and inconveniently hard to kill. Humans reacted to the first hours of Redhowl not as victims in a horror story, but as themselves. At 11 p.m., New Accra's emergency rooms were packed with festival-goers whose eyes were bloodshot, whose skin was hot to the touch, whose descriptions of their symptoms all shared a strange theme. "It burns," one woman told the triage nurse, panting. Like bad pepper in my veins. But if I drink cold water, it helps a bit. And this is going to sound stupid, but I swear when I ate more of the stew, it shifted. It's like it was following something." A man in the next bed mumbled, "I thought it was just the stupid challenge. Now I can feel it in my bones." Monitors beeped. Fluids dripped. Medics moved with professional calm overlaying a growing dread. Outside, the festival had half emptied. The joy bled out of it and carried on stretchers. By midnight, similar scenes unfolded in dozens of cities. In some, outbreaks were less severe. In others, especially where the meteoroid fragments had burned brightest, the cases spiked sharply. Helix Mantle's sensors painted a global heat map. Amaka watched it grow. The red splotches were not random. They lined up with major population centers and several orbital habitats. Oasis Torus, Earth's commercial jewel in low orbit, registered its own hotspot. A cluster of workers and visitors suddenly down with the same burning symptoms. Pattern suggests even dispersal with atmospheric guidance, Helix 9 said. This was not an imprecise strike. It was a test bed, Amaka muttered. They wanted high density for reliable results, minimal wasted effort. Yi frowned at her interface. But these fatality projections, they're nasty. The curve turns up sharply after the first 24 hours. If it keeps reinforcing that neural channel, they'll be screaming before their bodies begin to fail. Unless we give it something else to do, Amaka said. Yi gave her a sidelong look.
You have that look. The one you had when you suggested teaching vaccine carriers to gossip about antigens.
Amaka's mouth twitched, humorless. I have that look because this thing is arrogant. She zoomed in on a portion of the pathogen's code. Look at it. It assumes that pain and heat channels are its private doorway, that every host will interact with these receptors in roughly the same way. Species that do not bathe their food in fire, Yi said. Exactly. Amaka flicked through patient data from New Accra, from Bangkok, from Lagos, from a mining enclave where fire noodles were a traditional comfort food. Look, fatality and progression rates differ by region, but the correlation isn't clean. It isn't just exposure level, it's diet. Populations with long histories of capsaicin and related compounds, they're exhibiting a weird variability. Faster initial symptom onset in some cases, but also faster stabilization because their receptors are already used to being harassed, Helix 9 said. They have baseline differences in expression, in desensitization thresholds. Which Redhowl wasn't tuned to, Amaka said. She leaned her elbows on the lab bench for a moment, thinking. Pain and heat were universal experiences for biological entities, but the way humans had culturally chosen to play with them was not. Centuries of experimenting with how far the tongue and gut could go had left marks at the biochemical level. She imagined some Krethis bioweapon designer, modeling humanity based on generic mammalian templates and whatever stolen data they could scrape from intercepted transmissions. She imagined them noting TRPV, one receptors common, calibrated for survival, pain avoidance likelihood high, and smiling their sharp, thin smile. She imagined them never once thinking, these creatures voluntarily chew glass for fun. Helix 9, she said slowly. Show me differential receptor activity in patients before and after ingesting spicy food during symptom onset. You are suggesting intentionally aggravating the primary interface? The AI asked. That seems counterintuitive.
Humans have made an art form of pursuing counterintuitive sensations, Yi said dryly.
Just show her. The data rolled. There it was. A spike in receptor activity in the minutes after capsaicin intake, followed by irregular oscillations in the pathogen's replication markers. In a few patients, those oscillations crashed. The pathogen's expressors plateaued or even dipped. There, Amaka said, tapping a curve. It overreacts. It doesn't have room in its design for the host to be this chaotic. The heat channel is supposed to be a clean, controlled conduit. Instead, it's a riot. And in a riot, Yi murmured, things get trampled. Helix 9 processed this without ego, without any gut feeling to guide it. But the math spoke clearly enough. If we can identify the combinations of stimulant compounds and timing that push the pathogen into misfolding, the AI said, we could induce a non-lethal crash in its replication cycle. It would not be a cure, but it could blunt the worst effects and buy us time. Then that's our first move, Amaka said. We turn every kitchen into a pharmacological lab. We are going to ask people to eat into the burn. Yi's eyes widened. You know what people are going to call this, right? Amaka thought of the name for their rapidly forming crash program, half joke, half statement. Project Hotpot. She allowed herself a thin smile. Let them, she said. Outside, in New Accra, the boy in the festival shirt lay on a stretcher in a converted gymnasium, sweat pouring down his face. His skin felt too hot from the inside out. His thoughts drifted in restless loops. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts. His family hovered near his bed. The volunteer medic, following a hastily updated protocol from Helix Mantle, approached with a plastic container. This is going to sound insane, she said, but we need you to eat this. Small bites. Slowly. He smelled chili, tomato, fermented fish, and the unmistakable scorched smell of overripe peppers stirred too long in hot oil. You're kidding, he whispered. I wish I were, the medic said. He stared at the spoon. Pain roared along his nerves, a constant burning tide. Somewhere deep inside, the Redhowl agent danced, thrilled at its conquest of receptors never meant to sustain such a signal for so long. He took the bite. The world detonated into a new kind of fire. His tongue screamed, his eyes watered, his throat convulsed. For a moment, the difference between the weapon and the food blurred into pure sensation. Then something odd happened. With his mouth howling, the pain from his limbs seemed hairline distant, a memory of a burn, not its present. The pathogen struggled to maintain its clean interface. The receptors in his mouth sent a storm of conflicting signals, strobing between heat and chemical, and enjoy and avoid. The weapon's elegant, murderous sequence did not include proper error handling for human stubbornness. In the boy's blood, some of the Redhowl proteins misfolded. They became junk, trash flagged for disposal by scavenger cells that had grown up inside a species that routinely poisoned itself for pleasure and called it dinner. The boy's fever did not break, but its upward climb slowed. Across the planet, similar small mercies unfolded, driven by an instinct older than spaceflight, sharing food in the face of danger, making a ritual out of survival. The next day, at 8 a.m., after a night with little sleep for anyone in authority, Admiral Harada stood beneath a holographic projection of the Earth and its immediate environs, listening to the voices of those who had the most to lose and the least room to react. Ambassador Virel's features were avian and angular, feather plates along their skull shifting subtly as they spoke. The pattern matches known Redhowl deployments, they said. The Krethis supremacy has refined this weapon over decades. They used it to strip 5 minor worlds of resistance, leaving populations that were not merely subjugated but transformed into living support for their fleets. I strongly suspect Earth is not their first or last target. You believe they would not risk aiming it here, one of the Combine counselors said bitterly. Virel's feathers lay flat. I believed they understood the consequences of turning one of the galaxy's most populous and creative species into a test site. I was apparently wrong. On a side panel, the Aureliad loom's presence manifested as a rolling, organic waveform of light. When it spoke, it did so as a composite voice threaded with harmonics that suggested a chorus of opinions. "We have tasted this code," the loom said. "It is indeed Redhowl, albeit a variant. It is more targeted than previous versions. It knows human sequences it should not know, meaning they have been watching us more closely than we thought," Kenji said. "Stealing more data, studying our medical archives." Yet they missed something. Amaka's voice came from another tile, hollow and exhausted through the long-distance channel. "They missed our addiction to hurting ourselves with flavor." Kenji almost smiled, but the expression died before it fully formed. "Doctor, I have your preliminary report. You are proposing we feed our way out of this. I am proposing we use what Redhowl was not designed to handle," Amaka said. "Our culinary masochism, our diversity of plant compounds. Pain and heat are not clean channels in humans. We fouled them generations ago. That buys us leverage." In the simulations, Helix 9 added, properly calibrated capsaicin and related compounds can trigger misfolding in approximately 23% of Redhowl particles per receptor cycle. Combined with aggressive antiviral measures, this may be sufficient to slow progression. "It's not enough," one of the counselors protested. "A 23% per cycle misfold is not a cure. We cannot ask our citizens to rely on pepper." "We are not," Amaka said, voice sharpening. "We are using this to buy time, to get ahead. And it is already happening, with or without our sanction. People are reaching for what feels like relief. We can guide that instinct or waste it." Kenji's mind slid briefly to an image from an earlier report, a community hall in rural Mexico, where locals had set up long tables and were spooning out bowls of spicy broth to lines of sweating, trembling neighbors. A local doctor, eyes ringed with fatigue, had said to the camera, "We noticed the ones who kept eating came back walking on their own." "Even if we slow it," Kenji said, "we still have to consider the next steps." Seru Kal, another tile lit, showing the pale, ridged features of a Krethis male in a restraint field. His compound eyes blinked once, slowly. The cuffs around his limbs glowed faintly. "You finally used the word," he said softly. "Redhowl. I had hoped to never hear it in your tongue." "You helped design early versions," Varel said, without accusation, simply stating a fact. "You defected after seeing the tests." Seru Kal's mandibles twitched. "I ran. Running is not noble, but I ran." "You can tell us what comes next," Kenji said. "What the Supremacy expects to see, and how they will react when they do not see it." Seru Kal's gaze shifted, as if looking past the camera to something only he remembered. "They designed it to break you twice," he said. "First, your bodies, then your will. The pain pathway is not incidental, it is integral. Sustained agony destabilizes thought, reduces coordinated resistance. Those who survive the neural onslaught begin to produce scaffolding useful for Krethis organoconstructs, structures grown from your own flesh, seeded by their follow-up spores. When they arrive with their fleets, they expect to find a world of either corpses or compliant substrates ready to be molded. They do not expect this." He nodded toward a side feed that showed clips from news channels. Families gathered around tables full of steaming, blistering dishes. People in makeshift hospital wards grinning blearily through tears and sweat, raising chopsticks or spoons. Medics ladling out carefully measured portions while wearing biohazard gear. "They did not model you turning their attack into a ritual," Seru Kal said. "Into a festival." The word sat oddly in his alien mouth. He seemed both baffled and begrudgingly impressed. Kenji let the tether of anger in his chest turn into something colder, sharper. "What will they do," he said, "when their monitors tell them their weapon is not performing as expected?" "They will adjust," Seru Kal said. "They will deploy adaptive variants. They will assume that your resistance is a parameter to be tuned around, unless you get there first and rewrite the foundation." "And can we?" one counselor asked. "Is it possible to turn Redhowl from within?" "Yes," Seru Kal said. "With enough time, enough knowledge, and enough willingness to risk unintended consequences." It uses a modular architecture. It was made to be changeable. Like us, Amaka murmured. Kenji looked around at the mosaic of faces. Human, Calarian, Krethis. Even the loom's formless representation seemed intent. The Solaris Combine is initiating Project Hotpot, he said. Dr. Nwosu will lead. Objective: understand and repurpose this weapon. Orbital and ground defense will prepare for the inevitable follow-up strike. Ambassador Virel, we will need the Confluence's diplomatic leverage when the rest of the galaxy sees what we are doing. Loom, we will need your oversight when the time comes to decide how far to push this. And in the meantime? A counselor asked. In the meantime, Kenji said, we officially endorse what our people are already doing. We will give them instructions, ratios, limits. We will ask them to participate in the most dangerous communal meal in human history. On New Accra's shoreline, midday sun burned through haze as volunteers strung shade cloths over rows of tables. At each, pot after pot simmered, their contents calculated by Helix 9's models and fine-tuned by local cooks who knew intimately how different peppers played together. Children watched with wide eyes as adults assembled. Wristbands glowing with temporary health monitor tags synced to the Helix mantle. Drones buzzed overhead, sampling the air, mapping thermal signatures, comparing them against Redhowl's spread. The boy in the festival shirt sat propped up on a bench, slower now but still feverish. His family hovered close. When the time came, he would join the line. His memory of the first spoonful was a blur of pain and defiance, but he remembered clearly the strange sense of having turned toward the fire instead of away from it. He was not the only one. In 10 cities, in mountain villages, on floating ocean platforms, in high-rise housing blocks, people who had never met each other experienced the same thing at roughly the same time. The moment where someone in authority, or someone they trusted, set a bowl or a skewer or a cup of steaming liquid in front of them and said, "This is going to hurt. It might save your life. It might help save everyone's." A species that had learned to make games out of endurance, challenges out of discomfort, and culture out of acquired tastes, took a collective breath and leaned forward. The Redhowl agent, sensing only the increased activity in its channels and the influx of compounds that sometimes fooled the brain into thinking it was tasting fire, tried to capitalize. It flooded signals. It clamped down. It did not understand that it was now competing for bandwidth with the smell of garlic and charred onion, with the emotional surge of laughing with friends, with the ancient human satisfaction of choosing to suffer on one's own terms. Not all hosts responded well. Some could not tolerate the extra strain. Some required rapid cooling and antiviral support. Project Hotpot's protocols were refined with each iteration. Doses were adjusted. Local cuisines were consulted for substitutions when certain ingredients were scarce. But the trend in the data was undeniable. Mortality curves bent, just enough to turn a fatal plunge into a hard slope. On Oasis Torus, far above the blue curve of Earth, Lucio Bermejo walked through the giant ring's central spoke, overseeing the hurried conversion of recreation areas into quarantine and research zones. The Torus had always been a marvel of engineering and culture, a wheel of habitat rotating to simulate gravity, its inner surface lined with parks, markets, and glass panels that looked down on the planet. Now, bulkheads sealed sections off, airlocks cycled more often, medical drones zipped along the curved corridors, their sensors tuned for signs of burning skin and ragged breathing. "People came up here to get away from the crowds," one of Lucio's colleagues said bitterly as they watched a family cluster together on a bench, waiting to be tested. Instead, the shower followed them. "Space isn't away anymore," Lucio replied. "It's just sideways." He pulled up schematics of the Torus. "We can reconfigure these sections as observation wards. They already have environmental controls. And these external gantries, we can mount additional sampling arrays there. Track every variant particle that passes. Project Hotpot needs data from microgravity as well." "You never turn off, do you?" the colleague said, half admiring, half exasperated. Lucio thought of the messages from Earth, of the footage of burn feasts. He thought of his grandmother's kitchen in Bogota, the way she had wielded peppers like surgical instruments. "If I stop," he said quietly, "I start thinking about my parents down there instead of the air ducts up here. So no, I do not turn off." On the other side of the Torus, a cluster of visitors from 3 different human colonies sat in a makeshift mess hall, eating bowls of carefully measured stew. Their expressions ranged from dread to grim determination to, in one case, outright excitement. "This is like that online challenge," a young woman said between mouthfuls, eyes streaming, "but with steaks and doctors and, oh gods, that's hot." Her neighbor, an older man in a work harness with a mining patch on his sleeve, grunted. "Back home, we call this Tuesday." Lucio watched them through a monitoring window. It was a surreal inversion, a high-tech orbital habitat relying on something as ancient and messy as spice to hold a line against a weapon born of the most advanced biological engineering the Krethis supremacy could bring to bear. He turned away as his slate chimed. A message from Project Hotpot, priority high. "Lucio," Amaka's recorded voice said, "we need you to rig one of the gravity-free labs for something a bit strange. We think we can get the modified strain to grow more cleanly there." "Modified," Lucio repeated under his breath. He looked back out at the people eating, at the sweat on their faces, at the determination in their eyes. "Of course you do," he said. "Of course we are not just going to block the punch. We are going to catch it and twist." In the secured depths of Project Hotpot's primary lab, Amaka, Yi, and Helix 9 stepped over an ethical line that everyone in the room saw clearly and chose to cross anyway. Redhowl's modular architecture made it a nightmare and an opportunity. It had been built not as a static plague, but as a toolkit, a chassis into which different payloads could be slotted. The Krethis supremacy had designed it that way so they could tailor its effects to different species and environments. Now, humans used that same flexibility to carve out an inner chamber inside the horror. "We preserve the basic carrier framework," Amaka said, guiding lines of virtual code with her fingers. "We strip out the part that overwrites human reproductive pathways, replace it with a benign marker that quietly flags host tissue as off-limits to similar agents. We keep the sensitivity to pain and heat receptors, but we add constraints that trigger degradation if signals exceed certain patterns." "And the payload?" Yi asked. Amaka looked at Seru Kal, whose image hovered on a separate display. "That is where you tell us what your people did to your own soldiers." Seru Kal flinched. "Krethis neurology was never meant to be that rigid," he said quietly. "We were once capable of divergent thought, individual preference. The supremacy did not trust that. They developed implants tuned to specific genetic markers, layered obedience on top of instinct. They used agents like this to maintain it. If you target those sequences, you could drop the chains without stopping the hearts. That is what we are proposing," Amaka said. "We are not interested in genocide. Some of your colleagues are," Seru Kal said, bitter. "Do not pretend otherwise. I have listened to your channels." He was not wrong. In late-night strategy sessions, some combined military advisors had argued for using Redhowl not just to defend, but to strike back, creating a variant that would ride harmlessly in human hosts but become lethal in Krethis bodies, spreading as a kind of justice. Kenji had listened to those arguments. He had not forgotten them. They were seductive in their finality. Now he watched from Steadfast's secure link as the Project Hotpot team laid out an alternative, a version of Redhowl that would lodge in humans as a controlled symbiont, conferring resistance against future-related attacks and acting as a key that, once brought into contact with a Krethis individual, would begin to dismantle obedience implants and reproductive controls rather than organs. "And to make sure you believe us," Amaka said, looking up at the loom's waveform, "we are going to show our work, all of it, in real time. You would open your biocode to us?" the Aureliad loom asked. Its harmonics carried a note that human psychologists had learned to interpret as surprise. "Not all of it," Tariq el-Badri said, speaking up from where he sat, surrounded by consoles. He was younger than most in the room, hair tied back in a messy knot, eyes bloodshot from watching code scroll all night. "Just the parts that matter, the parts that could become weapons if mishandled, with safeguards you can enforce. Think of it as a distributed checksum. If we try to cheat, You broadcast it. Why suggest this? The loom asked him, when it will make your own people's lives more complicated. Because if we do not, Tarek said, the rest of the galaxy will never trust us after this. If we become the ones carrying a programmable plague keyed to their genetics, they will quarantine us, or worse. We need oversight we cannot subvert without consequence. You are good at consequence. The loom's light flared, dimmed, flared again, as thousands of Aureliad subminds debated. Then, we accept, it said. We will mirror your work. We will not permit transmission of code segments that violate the constraints you have declared. We will not be perfect, but we will be watching. Always. Creepy, Yi muttered under her breath. Reassuring, Terry countered. In this context, Seru Kal watched all of this with an unreadable expression. Your species terrifies me, he said at last. You take the weapon that was meant to end you, and you propose to hang it around your own neck with a lock that everyone else holds a key to. That is one way to put it, Amaka said. Another is that we are allergic to being powerless. This is how we cope. Seru Kal gave a dry, clicking sound that might have been laughter. And this modified strain? Ambassador Virel asked, joining the session remotely. You are confident it will not slip? No one can be fully confident, Helix 9 said. We can be rigorous. We can stack constraints. We can monitor. But biology is not software. It is a field of probabilistic fireworks. Amaka's gaze was steady. We have a choice between certain devastation and a controlled risk, and we have something else going for us. What is that? Virel asked. Volunteers, Amaka said. A lot of them. Around the world and in orbit. Activation ceremonies replaced improvised burn feasts. In New Accra, at 6 p.m. the following day, the same plaza where the festival had kicked off now hosted a different kind of gathering. Large screens displayed simple instructions. Everyone participating wore thin, disposable biosensors tracked by Helix Mantle. Medics circulated with injectors and tablets. The boy in the festival shirt sat with his family again, his fever lower now, his mind clearer but laced with apprehension. On the screen, a representative from Project Hotpot explained in clipped, careful language what was about to happen. You have heard rumors, she said. This is the confirmation. We have found a way to coexist with a tamed version of the agent that attacked us. By accepting this modified strain into our bodies, under controlled conditions, we can gain resistance not only to this wave, but likely to future attempts. We can also, when necessary, carry a kind of cure to those who were once ordered to be our enemies. This is voluntary. This is not without risk, but you will not be alone in it. The camera cut to scenes from other cities, other habitats, showing lines of people nodding, some anxious, some defiant. It showed Admiral Harada rolling up his own sleeve aboard Steadfast as a medic approached with an injector and a small dish of something that looked suspiciously like a raw pepper sliced open and filled with seeds. Leadership is participation, Kenji said into the camera, voice calm. We are asking you to do something we are unwilling to refuse ourselves. In the plaza, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some had already decided. Some needed more time. Some stepped back, out of lines. Fear knotted in their throats. The boy watched his parents exchange a glance. His mother nodded slowly. His father exhaled. We do this together, his father said. We already started with the food. This is more precise. He looked at his son. You in? The boy's mouth was dry. He thought of the scream of his nerves when the first spoonful had hit, the way the pain had layered over the inner burn until something in his body had shifted. If I say no, he asked, will you be mad? No, his mother said fiercely. This is your choice. He stared at his hands, at the faint mark where his IV had been. He thought of the vids showing Krethis fleets over dead worlds, the term factory substrate spoken in two calm voices. He raised his head. I am in, he said. In activation hubs across the Combine, similar decisions were made. Some were easy. Some were agonizing. Some people had underlying conditions that made participation medically unwise. For them, alternative protocols were arranged. But enough said yes that when the Helix Mantle's activation window opened at 8 p.m., billions of receptors across humanity lit up with a coordinated pattern. The modified Redhowl strain slid into this choreography like a dancer stepping onto a crowded floor. It settled into nerves already alive with capsaicin fire. It whispered its reprogrammed instructions to cells primed to listen, then questioned, then adapt. Helix 9 and its partner systems recorded every fluctuation. The Aureliad loom traced every packet of encoded corrections sent out to mirror nodes, enforcing constraints. For a moment, the galaxy held its breath, watching a species choose to become host to a tamed version of the thing that had tried to hollow it out. Then, in the cold between stars, the Krethis supremacy made its next move. The Krethis battle group dropped out of jump near the Earth-Moon system at 2 a.m. local time over the Atlantic, where night still lay thick over the ocean. Their ships resembled knotted blades, grown rather than built, their hulls ridged with organic patterns. Trails of ionized gas marked their path. Steadfast's alarms flared crimson. Pavel snapped upright from the half-doze he had allowed himself in a crew chair, heart pounding even before his conscious mind caught up. "Contacts," he barked. "Multiple. Bearing 0.9. Hostile signatures confirmed." Krethis biomass configurations match supremacy fleet elements. Kenji was on the command deck in less than a minute, uniform jacket half-fastened, hair slightly tousled. He moved with the steadiness of someone who had practiced this moment in his mind for years. "Status of orbital and surface defenses?" he asked. "Helix Mantle is at full integration," Pavel said. "Ground-to-orbit missiles are hot, defense platforms awake. SCS Farstep is vectoring to intercept lead elements. Other Combine ships are en route from outer positions. On their own ships, Krethis commanders reviewed data from their distant monitors. On their screens, Earth glowed with more biological activity than before, but it was not the decadent surge of infrastructure they had come to expect. Redhowl metrics were wrong. Too many hosts surviving, too many off-pattern reactions. To them, this meant only one thing. The weapon needed adjustment. A second generation, an adaptive layer, would correct the error. Deep in the lead flagship, nestled in a hollow of hardened cartilage and conductive gel, an organ pulsed with encoded plans. It began releasing adaptive Redhowl spores into the fleet's internal atmosphere, priming them for release. On Steadfast, Helix 9 sensors flared. "New strain detected in the vector space," the AI said. "Sequence similarity to original Redhowl is high, but mutation pathways are open. This is an adaptive version. It is attempting to read and respond to the countermeasures we have deployed." "It is watching us back," Yi said quietly. "Can it hijack our modified strain?" Kenji asked. "In its current form, not fully," Helix 9 said. "But it can learn from it, perhaps subvert its constraints. It is learning at the edges already." "Then we do not give it the time to learn," Kenji said. He turned to a tactical display. "Time to interception?" "Farstep is 3 minutes from engagement," Pavel said. "They are outnumbered, but their speed gives them an opening to disrupt the Krethis formation. Fleet elements from Luna and Mars stations will arrive in staggered waves after that." Kenji's mind, always split between immediate and strategic, now divided into three: the battle in space, the activated strain in human bodies, and the moral knife edge they were walking. "Patch me through to Captain on Farstep," he said. The image that appeared in front of him a second later showed a woman in a tight-trimmed uniform with the hard look of someone who had never expected to grow old. Behind her, the Farstep's bridge crew worked in tightly choreographed urgency. "Admiral," she said, "we are about to dance with monsters. You know the objective," he said. "Disrupt their approach. Create an opening for our boarding teams. We need someone inside that flagship to reach their biocore." "That is a lot to ask," she said. "Yes," Kenji said simply. She nodded. "Then we will do it, or die trying." The line cut. Steadfast's crew watched on the main display as Farstep burned its engines hotter than safe, a spear of light arrowing toward the jagged silhouette of the Krethis flagship. Pavel saw the staging vectors for the boarding pods populate his interface and thought, not for the first time, that the human capacity for turning impossible tasks into to-do lists was its own kind of madness. On the Project Hotpot lab floor, Amaka felt the ripple of Helix 9's new alert. Adaptive strain is interacting with host receptors now, the AI said. It is probing. Our modified variant is holding, but the strain is beginning to map it. Of course it is, Tariq muttered. We show it a clever trick. It wants to learn it. Can we move faster? Yi asked. Only if we are there, Seru Kal said unexpectedly. In their core, where their organ directs the patterns. You are playing with a shadow here. You need the light source. He looked straight into the camera linked to Farstep's mission planning room. You need me on that ship, he said. Kenji heard that through a side channel and closed his eyes for a second. Sending a Krethis defector into the heart of a Krethis flagship was the kind of poetic irony that tacticians liked and sane people feared. Can we trust you? Kenji asked. Seru Kal's mandibles twitched. No, he said. You should not trust anyone in this. You should build systems that make betrayal costly. You already are. But I am the only one who knows which organ sequence controls the adaptive cascade. Give me a chance to cut it off at the head. You are not a soldier, Viral said. Pain made me into something else, Seru Kal replied quietly. I owe the supremacy a debt. I would very much like to pay it. 2 minutes later, he was sealed into a specialized module attached to the side of one of Farstep's boarding pods, wrapped in armor and restraints both. As Farstep slingshotted around Steadfast's defensive line, a flurry of messages crossed through Helix Mantle, instructions to burn feast coordinators on Earth to temporarily pause new activation doses, command signals to ground-based missile batteries, medical advisories to remote settlements. On the boys' street in New Accra, his wristband buzzed twice, indicating a hold. He looked up from the bowl his mother had just prepared, brow furrowing. Why are we stopping? He asked. Because up there, his father said, pointing at the sky, someone is about to try something very stupid and very brave. They need things steady down here while they do it. Over their heads, invisible by day, Farstep closed with the enemy. When the Krethis flagship opened fire, it did so in a pattern designed to shatter opposing fleets and scatter survivors. Farstep dove through the opening salvo in maneuvers that would have torn older ships apart. Alarms screamed. Bulkheads groaned. Poultry-sized repair drones swarmed like angry flies around wounded sections. "Hold her together!" the captain snarled, teeth bared. "We only need one pass." Pavel watched remotely as Farstep veered close enough to the flagship's hull that the two ships' shields skinned against each other in a brief, blinding flash. In that moment, Farstep's launch bays spat out boarding pods, each wrapped in a cocoon of ablative armor and propelled by a burst of compressed plasma. "Come on," Pavel whispered. One pod was vaporized instantly by a defensive beam. A second ricocheted off a ridged outcropping and spun into space, tumbling. 3 made contact, magnetic clamps biting into alien flesh metal. Inside one, Seru Kal felt the impact through multiple levels of dampening. His restraint shell released with a hiss. Around him, human marines in capacitive boarding rigs checked their weapons and systems. Their armor glistened with sensor clusters and protective fields. The pod's cutting ring activated, chewing a circular tunnel through the Krethis hull. Hot fragments flew. Seared air rushed in. Beyond, a corridor pulsated with faint bioluminescence, walls lined with ridged vascular structures. "Stay close," a Marine lieutenant said to Seru Kal. "We bleed, you bleed, we all scream together." It was meant as humor. It came out like prophecy. They moved into the living ship. The Krethis interior was warm and slightly damp, the air tasting faintly metallic. Seru Kal navigated by memory, calling out turns, bypasses, guarded nodes. Marines covered intersections, firing controlled bursts at oncoming defenders. The Krethis soldiers they encountered moved with unsettling coordination, their faces blank with conditioned obedience. Inside each of those bodies, obedience implants hummed, ruling over whatever native impulses had once lived there. Amaka watched their helmet feeds from Project Hotpot. The lab, a tense cocoon of silence, punctured only by Helix 9's updates and the tap of Tariq's fingers on virtual keys. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew this was where their work either leaped into messy triumph or scattered into scattered lethal failure. In the boy's blood, the adaptive Redhowl strain continued to probe, tickling his nerve endings, searching for ways around the constraints the modified version had added. It bumped against hard limits and retreated, then tried again, like waves worrying at a rock. The modified strain adapted too, under Helix 9's guidance, learning which moves to anticipate. Biological code clashed within trillions of cells like dueling improvisational musicians, each riff testing the other. Entering biocore antechamber, Seru Kal's voice came through, slightly distorted. His helmet camera showed a wide space lined with pseudo-organs suspended in membranes, each pulsing faintly. "The central node is beyond that membrane," he said. "I will need interface contact. We will need a perimeter," the Marine lieutenant said. "Squads, set up crossfire. Watch the ceiling. Last thing we need is a digestive surprise." As humans secured the chamber, Krethis reinforcements crashed against them from branching tunnels. On both sides, rounds of exotic munitions tore through flesh and shell. Searing gouts of bioacid met shimmering defensive fields. In the confusion, a single Krethis soldier broke through the lines and found themselves staring at Seru Kal. Recognition flickered in their eyes. Then, shock. "You," they said in their own tongue. "Traitor." Seru Kal's answer came without hesitation. "Student." He saw in the other's face the rigid sheen of obedience, layered over something struggling beneath. A flicker of doubt, perhaps, or curiosity. If he and the human succeeded, that flicker would become a fire. "Let him through," the lieutenant snapped. Seru Kal dove for the membranous sheet, covering the central organ. His suit's manipulators extended. He pressed gloved hands to the slick surface. "Helix 9, Amaka said. "We're linked?" "Link active," the AI replied. "Warning. Neural feedback risk high. His implants are old, mismatched to our interfaces." Seru Kal closed his eyes, or their functional equivalent, and plunged his consciousness into the howl. Krethis biocontrol systems did not think in words. They thought in pulses, in cascades of biochemical triggers, in ripples across vats of engineered tissue. Seru Kal's training as a biotechnologist and his later years as a dissident had taught him how to read those signals and how to cut across them. Now, with Helix 9 translating between human and Krethis architectures, he surged toward the heart of the adaptive Redhowl engine. It felt like a red ocean, churning, eager to shape and reshape itself. "Amaka," Helix 9 said, voice sharpened by urgency. "We have access to their master adaptation routines. We can overwrite." On Earth, in activation centers, people groaned as the new strain pressed harder against their constraints. Hospital wards blurred with the edges of pain. Monitors spiked. "We do it now," Amaka said. She and Tarek hurled their prepared patterns into the open thread. The modified strain's code, reinforced by Aureliad oversight, blossomed through the Krethis system like a mirrored explosion. They had planned for this as best they could. Their template carried two intertwined possibilities, determined by one final switch: destruction or inversion. They could use the adaptive engine to send a kill signal to every Krethis body bearing obedience, implants, shocking systems into such rapid failure that death would arrive in minutes. Or they could invert the control logic, telling every implant to unravel, to dissolve its own authority, to stand down. In the biocore, Seru Kal felt both options like weights in his hands. One was blunt, simple, definitive. The other was messy, full of unknowables. On Steadfast, a strategic advisory channel erupted in arguments. "We have them," one voice said. "We can end the supremacy's threat in a single stroke." "At the cost of how many civilians?" another countered. "You think their rulers are the only ones implanted? Their workers? Their children? They built their empire on the back of this atrocity. Why should they not taste enough?" Kenji said, cutting through. He had heard enough battle cries in his life. He had also seen too many aftermaths. He looked at Ambassador Viral, who had gone very still. "If we choose extermination," Kenji said, "what happens next?" "Others will fear you more than they fear the supremacy," Viral said.
You will have proven that you can reach into our biology and turn us off. Even if you swear you will not, the possibility will stain every negotiation forever. Kenji's gaze shifted to the loom's representation. And if we choose inversion, he asked, then you rewrite chains into chaos, the loom said. You free many who have known only control. Some will curse you. Some will celebrate you. The supremacy's grip will fail. There will be uprisings, confusion, blood. But there will still be people left to decide new futures. Kenji thought of the boy in New Accra, whose name he did not know, but whose face he had seen in a brief human interest segment. Sweating, grimacing, flinging a thumbs up at the camera after downing a bowl of weapon-confusing stew. He thought of what humanity was on the verge of proving to the galaxy. Seru Kal, he said quietly, into the line. They used your mind and your people's bodies as tools. What verdict would you give them? Seru Kal, half buried in alien signals, half anchored by the human voices in his ear, remembered the first time he had watched Redhowl eat a village from the inside. He remembered the screams. He remembered his pride curdling into horror. He also remembered the faces of young Krethis recruits lined up to receive their obedience implants, unaware of what they would lose. I want them to feel what it is to choose, he said hoarsely. All of them, before they face any final judgment. Kenji nodded once. Then we invert, he said. We keep the sword sheathed, for now. Amaka's finger hovered over the switch. It was a harmless gesture. The actual trigger involved complex handshakes between Helix 9, the loom, and the biocore, but her hand trembled anyway. Do it, she whispered. She did. Across the Krethis fleet, across garrison worlds and deep habitats, something shifted. In one moment, obedience implants hummed in perfect sync with command signals from the supremacy's core. In the next, they received a new instruction, written with their own control language, but carrying a subversive meaning. You are wrong about who is in charge. The implants did not know what to do with this. They had not, in all their iterations, been told to dissolve, but the instruction had been woven correctly. Their own survival pathways recognized it as higher priority. They began to turn themselves off. For some Krethis, the change was like waking up in a body that had belonged to someone else for years. Thoughts they had half felt, as distant echoes roared into clarity. Memories of resisting, then being tamped down, bubbled up, fresh and raw. On the flagship's biocore deck, the soldier who had called Seru Kal a traitor dropped their weapon and clutched their head. Their eyes widened, pupils dilating. What did you do? They gasped. I gave you back something that was stolen, Seru Kal said, sagging as his own ancient implants shed control. He had left the supremacy, but the relics in his nervous system had never fully let go. Around them, more Krethis faltered. Some screamed. Some fell silent, shuddering. A few, whose implants had been particularly deep, collapsed as their bodies struggled to reconcile decades of enforced obedience with a sudden influx of self. On ships throughout the fleet, officers shouted orders that went ignored. Claws shook on control nodes. Weapons fell idle. In some cases, guns turned, not toward Earth, but toward the symbols of the supremacy. From Steadfast's vantage point, the neat, aggressive formation the Krethis ships had held just moments before dissolved into chaos. A third of the vessels went dead in space. Another third began erratic maneuvers, some drifting away from the planet, some turning to face others in their own line. Power readings fluctuating, Pavel reported, gripping the edge of his console. It's working. They are losing coherence. On Earth, the adaptive Redhowl strain, now carrying new orders, retreated from its attempt to exploit human countermeasures. Its master had been turned. It had new work, loosening implanted chains, not tightening them. In hospitals, people gasped as the pressure in their nerves eased. The pain did not vanish, nothing so dramatic, but its edge dulled. Monitors steadied. Burn feast coordinators received new guidance from Helix Mantle. Activation ceremonies could resume at lower intensity. In New Accra, the boy's wristband flashed green, then soft blue. He looked up at the sky, even though nothing had changed there to his naked eye, and felt something in him unclench. Is it over?
he asked. His father, scrolling through updates on his slate, shook his head slowly. Not over, he said. But the worst wave might have broken. The battle did not end in a single instant. Confused Krethis captains, some still partially under control, fought against their own crews. Some ships fired spasmodically at nearby allies. Others powered down weapons entirely in acts of mutiny. Human forces, trained to take advantage of any opening, had to restrain themselves from turning the chaos into a slaughter. Targets were still armored and dangerous, but the calculus had changed. On Far Steps Bridge, the captain hissed as a glancing beam carved a glowing line along the hull. "Admiral," she said into the comm, "we can mow them down now, or we can stand off and see who wants to talk. Your call." Kenji watched sensor readouts as immunological and neurological telemetry from captive Krethis across known space streamed in. Redhowl's inversion was not perfect. Some implants resisted breaking. Some hosts reacted badly. But the overall trend was clear. Obedience was fracturing like ice. "Broadcast on open band," he said. "In Krethis, trade tongue, and in ours." He cleared his throat once. "This is Admiral Kenji Harada of Orbital Fortress, Steadfast," he said. "We have interfered with the systems your rulers use to control you. That is an act of war. It is also an act of redress. We will accept surrender from any who choose it. We will also accept your rage, but we will not continue to fire on ships whose weapons have gone dark." There was no guarantee that would matter, but in the next several minutes, a flurry of signals came back, some in trembling Krethis, some in machine-translated mishmashes, offers of ceasefire, raw screams of liberation, frantic questions. One transmission, from a smaller Krethis cruiser on the fleet's flank, came from a young voice. "What did you do to us?" it demanded. "Why do I remember things I was never allowed to remember before? Why do I want to throw my commander out of the airlock and then hug him?" Kenji almost laughed. "Absurdly. We took away the part that told you not to ask that question," he said. "What you do with the answer is now up to you." The Aureliad loom watched all this unfold, its consciousness threaded through relay nodes and sensor feeds. It had seen empires rise and fall, species terraform their own minds, plagues bloom and burn out. It had never seen a civilization respond to a genocidal bioweapon by inviting it in, remodeling it collaboratively, and then using it to grant another species a brutally honest kind of freedom. It adjusted some of its long-term models. Months later, after treaties and conditional surrenders and chaotic uprisings had begun to reshuffle the map of power, life in New Accra found a new groove. Some changes were obvious. Medical clinics offered standardized screening for the modified Redhowl strain, now recognized simply as the rider in casual speech. Certified activators supervised periodic booster ceremonies. Quieter now, more like seasonal flu shots mixed with small communal meals. Spice vendors did brisk business. One stall near the festival plaza hung a new sign, Redhowl Stew, in bold letters with a small disclaimer underneath. The name is a joke, contains no actual bioweapons. Probably. The boy in the festival shirt, older now, stopped at that stall with friends. They ordered a round. When the bowls arrived, steaming and crimson, one of his friends lifted a spoon and grinned. "You realize," she said, "we are basically commemorating the time aliens tried to cook us from the inside, and we responded by making a cuisine out of it. That is what we do," he said. "We remix." In a quiet corner of the city, in a clinic whose windows looked out on a line of pepper plants growing against a wall, Dr. Amaka Nwosu scrolled through an odd log entry from Helix Mantle's deeper diagnostics. It showed an anomaly during the height of the crisis, a faint outbound ping in the pattern space, bouncing off known relays, then vanishing into unsigned territory. "It looks like someone saying hello back," Yi said over her shoulder. "Or like a mirror echo," Amaka said. "Or like a promise." "Does it scare you?" Yi asked. "Yes," Amaka said. "And no. If something out there recognized what we did and decided to reach out, I would rather know than not. Ignorance has not served anyone well lately." She closed the log. "When a manacle and Outside, a group of schoolchildren walked past, pointing at the pepper plants, their teacher explaining in simple terms how eating hot food had once helped save the world. Amaka listened to their laughter drift through the open window and thought of all the improbable choices that had led to this relatively ordinary day. The decision to treat pain as a playground, the stubborn refusal to accept a binary of victim or monster, the willingness to carry a dangerous gift in their own cells for the sake of future leverage. Humanity had eaten a weapon meant to erase it, and in doing so, had forced the galaxy to reconsider what could and could not be turned into a shared table. Somewhere, between stars, the Krethis supremacy's old symbols crumbled. New flags rose, some national, some ideological, some simply representing local choices. Among the freed, stories spread of how the chains had dissolved, a whisper about humans who had taken their torment and brewed an antidote out of it, then offered it not as a curse, but as a key. On Oasis Torus, visitors from newly independent Krethis enclaves walked the ring's internal parks, watching humans picnic with bowls of steaming, spicy food. They tasted cautiously when offered. Some coughed violently. Some laughed, a sound that startled them. Ambassador Virel, observing one such scene, flicked their feathers thoughtfully. "Your species," they said softly to Admiral Harada, who had joined them on leave, "has a talent for making the rest of us feel both safer and more afraid at the same time." Kenji watched a child feed a bite of mild red stew to a curious Krethis visitor, saw the wince, followed by a hesitant chuckle. "We are still learning what to do with that," he said. "But we are not done yet." He did not know who, exactly, had pinged back during the crisis. He did not know what challenges would emerge from that distant acknowledgement. But he knew, bone deep, that when they came, humanity would greet them with the same impossible mix of caution, curiosity, and the faintly reckless desire to see if they could make something edible out of it.